In today's episode, we're going to talk about how to make the holistic admissions process more efficient. Let's talk about holistic success. Hi, everyone. My name is Anju Visen-Singh, and welcome to this episode of the Holistic Success Show. Here with me today is Dr. Kelly Dore, who is the VP of Science and Innovation at Acuity Insights. She is also an adjunct professor at McMaster University and a thought leader and a speaker at a number of global conferences. So, welcome, Kelly.
Thank you, Anju. So excited to chat holistic admissions today.
Okay, that's great. So let's get started. And the first thing I want to ask you is first things first is what is holistic admissions? The whole episode is about holistic admissions. So let's just get that straight.
Right. So when we start thinking about a person, for example, any human has their own unique qualities, their strengths that they bring to the table, and they're going to be varied for each of us. So if we, for example, created a team, the team is often strong because they have so many diverse strengths. Different folks on the team are bringing different perspectives, and they have different areas where they're strong and different areas where maybe they're not as strong. However, oftentimes when it comes to admissions in higher education or professional programs, all too often we're led primarily to think of strengths by academics. And those academics become the determinants of who can be successful, who we want to bring into our program. However, we know that that's not all that's important. That's really just one piece of the puzzle. So, how do we bring in all those other factors to highlight the strengths and really the true abilities of the applicants who are applying to our programs? And that's where holistic assessment and holistic admissions it becomes so important. It combines so many different aspects of an applicant. Their academics, absolutely, but their experiences, their qualities, and their other non-cognitive attributes during the admissions process. And it's this approach where we bring in all of these different data points that are defensible and help us truly predict how somebody's going to do that allows us to identify candidates who either align to our program or our own mission that we have, and ensuring that we're making sure we're completing our admissions process more equitably and we're considering all applicants who can be successful. I often use the analogy of holistic admissions allows us to add more pixels to the picture of our applicants to get a clearer and clearer image of who they are. So the more defensible data points that we're adding, the clearer image that we have of somebody's true potential for success.
Thanks for that, Kelly. So, why are holistic admissions important?
Absolutely. Well, what we know about holistic admissions is that, as we said, it allows us to identify diverse applicants' strengths and their ability for success. So, what we know holistic admissions allows us to do is one, make sure that we're not eliminating applicants just based on a single data point. So, based solely on their grades. If we were to rate everybody only ever based on their GPA coming into our program, for example, that's only one determinant of who they are and how likely they are to be successful. We're not going to identify folks who have incredible leadership abilities, incredible abilities to communicate or collaborate with others. And we know that we need all of those things in different combinations to be successful. There are folks who are going to struggle, for example, with their GPA. Maybe they had to work or they had to support a family member or they couldn't afford tutoring. And so their GPA is potentially not fully representative of their true academic abilities. And so if we're only measuring somebody based on their GPA, we're going to be eliminating lots of folks who come into our applicant pipeline who are actually potentially incredibly successful and who have the opportunity to truly be representative. The other important aspect of that, Anju, is that the traditional metrics that we use in our admissions process, whether that's their GPA or maybe a standardized academic test, or even traditional personal statements and reference letters, tend to have significant bias associated with them. And what that means is that we're bringing that bias into our admissions process. And therefore, by using just those metrics, whether it's just GPA or just academic tests, we're in fact putting limitations on those who we consider in our program. We're bringing those biases in and we're selecting out people from being eligible based on small data points of what it truly means to be successful, And also B, we're using it biased processes in order to do that. So the goal with holistic admissions is really to make sure that we're looking at all aspects of success, because somebody could have a moderate GPA but have incredible leadership. They could have incredible communication skills. And there's somebody who is going to be successful in your program as well, because it's not just their academic abilities. We know so many times, a lot of us academics tell stories of folks who come in and they've had a perfect GPA, but they struggle when they get into our program because they maybe don't have the ability to work well with others or communicate. They're very, very book smart. They can memorize, but they're not as good at that critical thinking, problem solving. So they struggle in some ways. So, how do we get a more robust measure of their true abilities early on? And that's adding those diverse data points in, which also allows us to have a broader consideration of all applicants who want to come to our program.
Yeah, so it really helps in maximizing opportunities for applicants and really helping them shine in many different ways. So, yeah, thanks for explaining that, Kelly. So, I think medicine has been at the forefront of holistic admissions. And why is that so?
It's something we've talked about for a long time in medicine. Not that it hasn't been in other professions or in higher education, but it's really been prominent. Medicine is definitely at the tip of the spear when it comes to leading those types of admissions process. And it's because very early on, we were able to associate some of the incredibly important outcomes and patient outcomes with what we were measuring. And what I mean by that is we were able to look at the academic success. All too often, GPA or MCAT scores were broad considerations of who should come into our admissions process and who should be eligible for medicine. But we realized that when we look further on beyond the first, second year of medical school, when they start working with patients, when they start going out into the clinic, when they start working in their teams, that these other metrics actually start to predict even more their likelihood of success. It's something that very easily the community grabbed onto in this concept of bedside manner. We've all talked about physicians or other health professionals that we want to go to, and maybe they're very, very knowledgeable, but we just accept they didn't have a great bedside manner. The problem with not having a good bedside manner, though, is that it leads to very poor patient adherence to drugs. It leads to very poor patient outcomes, and it leads to lots of malpractice. So, in fact, we were able to look at the data to say, and Maxine Papadakis did a great study many, many years ago, looking at the outcomes and looking at the reasons for malpractice out into professional practice for medicine, and found that over 90% of them were due to professionalism complaints. We know that patients, for example, can't measure whether or not the medical knowledge of the doctor is correct, whether the medications they're prescribing are correct, but they can truly measure somebody's bedside manner, their communication, their willingness to listen to other health professionals, that insurance that they're having appropriate health care. And that's the thing that patients really started to be able to notice is we can measure this, it is important. And the community started to echo that back to health professionals. And so the accrediting bodies of medicine listened, they understood that this is a main driving practice of what makes a good, competent physician. And we see now, particularly for hospital boards, patient satisfaction is a huge driver of things that they measure. And to ensure that they're providing appropriate patient care, they need to know that those are in place, that the patients are going to be listening. They're going to be adherent to the prescriptions and to the clinical practice that the physician is giving. So, because it can be accurate or not accurate, but if the patient can't adhere to it, or if they can't properly give consent, or if they don't want to come back and see the physician, you can't ensure that there's going to be good patient care. And so all of those outcomes started to drive the accreditation bodies, the medical schools, the hospital systems to say, we need to start paying attention to this. And so they've really been trying to ensure that they were looking at outcomes, and they were doing so to ensure they had a diverse workforce coming in. And so they were bringing both factors in, making sure A, they were looking at multiple aspects of what was important, and B, that they were doing it in a way that ensured they were mitigating bias, that they were looking at all of the different aspects of an applicant and their life experiences that they've gone through, maybe different access to resources that they've had, so that they weren't putting barriers in place. Because the other thing that we know is that the more diverse the medical school workforce is, and therefore the practicing body of medicine, the better patient outcomes are for the entire population.
That is such a great way to explain it, Kelly. And one would say that that would be true for practically any profession. It's very critical for medicine, but also equally critical when you think about business or engineering or law or any of those types of disciplines.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, it was obvious in medicine because we were looking at patient outcomes, life and death situations. So it really rose to the top. But the problem is that when we look at things, let's take engineering, for example, or teachers' education or business, all of them have to solve complex problems, work with very diverse populations, whether that's within their teammates or if they're solving problems for the world. All folks who are in these professions and these practices have to be able to manage the complexity of the problems, the working with different folks to get to the solution, and working with different populations. So, that ability to communicate. I often said, when I've been talking to deans of business schools or engineering programs, it is one thing to have the knowledge, but if you're in a team where you can't communicate the knowledge, be that in your school or out in the workplace, then having the knowledge is not enough. Because if you can't get that knowledge to anyone else, if you can't communicate your solutions or your creative thinking or listen to others as they're coming up with solutions, you're going to struggle. And it doesn't matter how much of that knowledge you have if you don't have the other aspects of it. And I reflect on, I have kids who are in elementary and middle school right now. And I think about their teachers and the problems they face on a day-to-day basis, and the amount that they have to do beyond just conveying knowledge. They have to work with folks who are coming in, kids who have different ways of learning, different life experiences, different ability to retain information or different timelines that they might learn on. And that's so complicated. And I know for sure I do want somebody who has the fundamental knowledge to convey that to my kids, but I absolutely want to make sure that they're empathetic, they're good communicators, they can teach them these basic fundamental skills of being collaborative and communicative and having empathy towards others. Those are things that we want to ensure we emulate, but also that we see in our professions.
So when we hear people talk, and they totally believe in that is the right path. Often there's a lot of conversation also around, but it's so time and resource intensive. How do we do this? How do we not burden our already burdened admission staff even more? So what are the challenges?
I sound like I'm talking about both sides of my mouth, Anju, when I say add more pixels, but be careful of your resources at the same time. But there is a way to do both. There is a way to consider it. And I think sometimes, we talked about medicine leading the way. And, it's important to acknowledge that oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes, medical schools might be differently resourced for their holistic admissions process. They might have much more dedicated staff or faculty, or external resources that they can bring in. They might have very large admissions committees that they bring in to do these processes. And that's not the reality, whether we're talking about universities with a centralized admissions process or other programs who, it may be one or two people who are trying to make the entire process work year round. And so it's important to acknowledge that when we say holistic admissions, it's not a single way of doing it. It's not an all or nothing that you must be ticking these 20 boxes or you're not doing it at all. It's about the journey more than it is about doing it exactly the way somebody else is doing it. And, yes, there are best principles and yes, there are best practices, but it's very important to be doing something rather than just saying, I can't do it all, so I should do nothing. And so I think that's maybe where we should spend a little bit of time talking about what is holistic admissions when we talk about it doing resource efficiently, because it is overwhelming to think about. It's overwhelming to try and understand, how do I build this big process of adding these pixels into my resource constrained school or program? How do I do this without being overwhelmed? Where do I even start? What is the best thing if I'm, going to take a bite out of this? Where do I start by doing it? And I think it's where we need to have a bit of a mind reset when we say holistic admissions. You see people hesitate to say, yeah, isn't that great? Everybody wants to do it, but there's no way to actually get it done. There are ways to manageably add data points into your process that doesn't add significant resources. And one of the first things to do is to pause and sort of say, what is my current process? What am I asking folks to do right now? And what is the data that I'm getting out of it? What am I measuring? And what are the resources associated with it? And finally, and most importantly, is it defensible? Is it giving me something that I need? Oftentimes, if we take a program that's using grade point average, that's a great starting point. That's some of your academic data points. As you know, and we've talked to leaders about, there's been an increase in the use of test optional admissions, where in the United States in particular, for some higher education programs, what we're hearing is that instead of having GPA and SAT or ACT, they're saying we'll have GPA and then it's optional whether or not you want to submit an SAT or ACT score. The reason that they did that is they found that in some cases they did the data analysis and they weren't getting a lot of additional information from that standardized test that they weren't already getting with GPA. But they also found that there were significant costs associated with writing those standardized tests, resource implications. You had to go sometimes, some of these, whether it's for graduate school or undergraduate, sometimes you have to go to test centers, or you have to, pay hundreds and hundreds of dollars and write test prep, which costs hundreds or thousands of dollars. And that's just not accessible for everyone. And so if you have a standardized assessment where by paying third-party coaching, you can increase your scores. That creates some inequity in what the scores are telling you. So schools have said, well, maybe we only need one of those data points. Maybe we don't need to ask for both. And then therefore, what are the other data points that we're adding? Anju, you spoke about this earlier, where people are saying, okay, so with test optional admissions, I don't have enough pixels. And so what else am I going to add? And folks have leaned on things like personal essay statements or reference letters or things like that. And while those can be meaningful and can maybe make you feel that you're getting, because it's measuring something completely different, you have to also look at the resources required to review those. As you talked about, some folks are hiring external teams to come in that they need to train and that they need to read and, hopefully align to their mission before they're reading those statements. But then with the advent of ChatGPT and other things, we also have to be concerned about how much that's giving you accurate data about the applicants. And so how do we just take a pause and say, what is the data that you're actually getting from those and the resource costs associated with that? I also know schools that request these personal statements and then just don't have time to review them. They're just out of resources. And so then we're asking students to put in effort for something that we're then not reviewing. And we know students, even, not all of them are using ChatGPT, but they're spending days or weeks on these letters trying to refine them. They're going to, I call them, as you know, I call them village statements sometimes because they're showing them to every friend, family member, anybody who's in the profession that they know, to have them review because it's such a high stakes for them. They want to get into the program. And so they're having them review. But that village review of their statement then also means that perhaps they're not as representative of the applicant just alone themselves and maybe more reflective of, do they have a friend or family member who's a lawyer or an engineer or who has done business school or who is a teacher or other, insert other profession there. And so it's not telling you as much. And so folks are then saying, well, what else do we have? Because it's not just pixels, it's you want pixels that are defensible. You want them that add information. So if you've got a measure of academics, what do you have that measures sort of that non-cognitive side of things? And that's where folks have been turning to situational judgment tests or SJTs as we talk about them to add that very defensible low resource data point in. But then it's also thinking about, some schools have interviews and some don't. How do you then, use your resources wisely to bring the right folks in for interview if you run them, so that you're minimizing. We also know that there's been asynchronous interviews that folks have used, but then you do have to make sure, again, in addition to defensible, in addition to, additive and measuring something that matters, you need to understand how the data point aligns to your mission. And so, are you getting something that's mission aligned? So, the very first point that I say when we talk about holistic admissions for programs and where to start, where to begin, is just take a pause and look at your process. What resources are you using now? What are you measuring now? Are you measuring academics three different ways across? Are you asking them to, submit their GPA, submit a standardized test score, and, do some shadowing experiences or something, or to do something else? And what that's telling you is just, not additive information necessarily where it adds to each other, that to get that holistic picture, you're sort of, again, narrowing in on one area. And so take a pause, reflect. What is your process looking like? Does it align to your mission? Does your mission really, ensure that you're making sure that you're serving your community, that you're serving, the different types of applicants you want to bring in and support in your program?
You are one of the co-creators of the Casper SJT, and by that virtue, and also because Acuity Insights offers that assessment, you've been on the journey with a lot of medical schools. You speak to a lot of admissions leaders across the globe. What would be your advice to admissions leaders and decision makers and practitioners?
Absolutely. It's, again, it can feel overwhelming, but there are some simple steps that I think are important. When you want to think about what's important for your admissions process or for your program, think about what is success and who has struggled in your program, and who has been successful in your program. And what that's going to help you identify is that, those who struggle in your program, we often talk about, the small percentage of folks who take 80% of our time to support and remediate and do all, to try and get them through our program. Because we admit people because we want to get them successful and have them graduate at the end of the day and feedback and contribute back into our community. And so one of the times when we have that conversation with admissions leaders, whether that's in medicine or that's in business or it's in law, there's common themes that we see. We know how relatively well to remediate knowledge. We can get folks through. But oftentimes whether it's student affairs or student success who turns their head back at admissions and say, how did we let these people in? Or, it's because they're facing significant professionalism problems, or, they're not able to work in their groups, or they've gone to, a work placement or something like that and really struggled to the point that at times, that work placement has been potentially threatened because, they say we don't have time to manage those types of students in our place of employment. And so that comes back to admission. So thinking about those types of examples, and what we often see is that adding a data point like a situational judgment test or an SJT to the measures of academic metrics that you have can be very useful. Situational judgment test Casper that we offer measures a wide variety of these personal and professional or non-cognitive attributes that we look at. One of the things, Anju, that I think is so exciting about it is that because it's open-ended, and that means that students just don't pick from a list of options when they see a complex scenario and say, what would you do? They actually need to either type or respond over a video as to what they would do in that situation. It's proctored and secure, so it's an authentic response. But what it allows you to do is ensure that you're capturing those life experiences in a defensible way. So we talked about the need to sort of have those life experiences captured. That's where the situational judgment test that's open-ended can do that. It can capture those life experiences in a defensible way, in a way that helps to predict for successful outcomes at the end of the day for students. So having information that you can use at the time of admissions, which complement each other. So being able to look academically at folks and at their non-cognitive attributes at the same time, what that allows you to do is if you're in a highly selective program where you've got lots of applicants and you have to winnow them down, that you're able to pick those who are strong academically and those who are strong from a personal and professional standpoint. If you're in a program who's doing holistic admissions and you need to recruit more, you need to ensure that you're getting enough applicants to fill your student body. The benefit of looking at both aspects of an applicant, their academic and their non cognitive side, is that you create a wider pool of eligible applicants to come in. So you're finding more applicants who are likely to be successful in your program because there are those who are sort of near the threshold of your academic metrics, but who are incredibly strong, who have great leadership or communication or resiliency or critical thinking skills. And you know that they're going to be successful as well. So it's that broadening of the pool, which can be incredibly helpful for programs that do need to recruit more, that do need to ensure they're filling their student body. And so for that reason, having those data points can really support all programs going across when they're looking at adding holistic admission. And then you can layer on top of that as well metrics of socioeconomic status, metrics of other diverse life experiences that are much more quantitative, that are easy to incorporate into your whether it's centralized admissions process or your program admissions process. So again, it's those more pixels that you're adding to get a sense of that applicant and whether it's adversity they needed to overcome, their life experiences or their academic or non-cognitive attributes. You're able to pull that all together in a very low resource way.
Thank you so much for sharing all of this with us, Kelly. I feel like we can talk about holistic admissions for hours and days on end, but I don't think we are going to, we do have an episode timeline to stick to. So we will stop now. Thanks so much, and hope you enjoyed this conversation. It's so close to your heart.
It was great. Thank you so much, Anju. Again, maybe we'll do episode 2 on holistic admissions next time.
Yeah, and we can do 3, 4, and 5 as well. Well, so with that promise, thanks to all of you for watching and listening. And please be sure to share this episode with any colleague that might be interested. And we will catch you in our next episode. Thank you so much. See you next time. If you enjoyed this episode of our Holistic Success Show, please be sure to check out our other episodes. And don't forget to subscribe. We have new episodes coming out every week, so hope to see you as a subscriber soon.